The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik. I will be your host for today's Nonprofit MBA podcast. And I am, for those of you who don't know, I am the co-founder of Financing Solutions. And for the last 13 years, Financing Solutions has been the leading provider in the United States of lines of credit for small nonprofits. It's a great product. It's very, very well liked. We have a 5-star rating on Google Reviews and the Better Business Bureau too. So if you're interested in learning more about a line of credit for your organization, please visit nonprofitmbapodcast.com. Again, that's nonprofitmbapodcast.com. And we have a sponsor today, as we usually do, Raise Fast Fund Online, which is accounting software that's specifically used for small to medium-sized nonprofits. If you're using QuickBooks or something else, I would sincerely suggest that you look at Raise, since that's all they do is nonprofits. It's a significant difference, and I'm a big proponent of software that's built for an industry. You can visit their website at araize.com, ARAIZE.com. And today, I'm very excited to be speaking with Barbara O'Reilly from Windmill Hill Consulting. And today's topic is going to be fundraising trends that we're seeing at nonprofits. Barbara has 30 years of annual fund, major gifts, and campaign fundraising experience at major nonprofit organizations, including Harvard University, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Oxford University in England, and the American Red Cross. Her consulting firm, Windmill Hill Consulting, helps nonprofit organizations peel back the layers and develop a profitable fundraising strategy to build more effective donor relationships and catapult the revenue. She serves as past president of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Washington, D.C. Metro Chapter, and as a former member of the advisory panel for Rogar I, the fundraising the fundraising think tank in the UK. And she has a lot of other accolades, including that she speaks a lot. So as a very informative speaker in this space. So Barbara, welcome to today's Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. Nice to speak with you again.
So it's the end of the year of 2023. And originally, just so everyone knows in the title, I put 2023 fundraising trends we're seeing at nonprofits. I kind of take the 2023 out because I did want to cover what trends we had seen in the past and now what it is. So let's just start off with the big question, and that is, in 2023, what have been the 3 biggest trends that you've seen?
Oh, so where to start? I feel like the biggest headline for sure is always the annual Giving USA report, which comes out in June. And for the last, I would say probably 3 years or so, it has been record-setting amounts. And this year, the headline that many people saw was that giving was down, which, yes, it's true. It was down, adjusted for inflation, from the previous year, from 2022. But really it was about $499 billion with a B. So it was down from, I think, $514 billion from the previous year. So
where was it since 2019? So 2019 is when COVID started. My understanding, 2019, and I don't know the statistics, was a great year. So was 2020. Well, let's say 2020 was a great year, and then it's been falling off since. Is that true?
No. So it's been 2020, 2021 were 2 record-setting years of sort of 400 and in the 400s of billions of dollars. So 430, I think, 440 in that range. And 2022, it continued that upward trend, which was surprising because often what we see is when there are record-setting years, we start to see things level off and they sort of plateau. But it's still that trend line because of the post-pandemic world we were living in, because of all of the increased needs around social justice and reform, political causes were also starting to really catch people's attention a little bit more. There was also the Dobbs Act, which went into effect, which also spurred a lot of philanthropy, increased philanthropy. So it continued to climb. What we saw though was that it started to level off, and it's a nice headline to say, yes, giving has down. And I should correct myself that it was the 2023 report reports on 2022. So it did level off a little bit, but it not by much, because in fact, what we are also seeing is that, after two record-setting years, it's not surprising that it starts to sort of stabilize, and people are giving in lots of different ways now. So the Giving USA report tracks tracks giving to nonprofit organizations, so registered 501c3 charities. But what we've seen surprisingly over the last few years is that there's been a surge in a lot of GoFundMe pages, people to people contributions, and other acts of generosity that are not captured in the Giving USA methodology. And nor does the report claim that it will be capturing those. So what we're seeing is that there's a rise in donors still wanting to do something, but finding lots of different paths to express their generosity and their interest to do good. So I think that's one of the headlines. The other headline, which probably needs to get a little bit more attention, but which has not yet, is that we have been seeing an alarming decline over the last 20 years in the number of donors and volunteers. So this research has been showing that the number of donors has been declining by about 20% since 20 years ago. That's a downward trajectory. So again, we're seeing that people are I think there's a lot of research that's happening now about the factors for that. Some of it is perhaps the way nonprofits are engaging with their donors, are thinking about donor relationships and that donor experience. But some of it is outside of the nonprofit control, which are societal factors. There's often been a correlation between religious institutions and religious attendance in houses of worship versus people's ability and interest to want to be part of their communities and giving back in that sort of way. We also see that there's the way we think about our own communities and our own neighborhoods is so very different than it was 20 years ago, and certainly 20 years before that. So there are a lot of different factors that are influencing that fact that people are starting to not give charitably. And that's one thing that we do have to worry about. And it's the same for volunteers. And again, the research is still being done about what those causes are, but a lot of our sort of just how we exist as society now. Although we're in a hyper-connected 21st century world, our time is even more limited than it ever was. We are, tethered to all of our various devices and facing lots of different demands on our time. So the ability to be able to give back, or the interest to be able to carve out whatever free time we have to be a volunteer, gets minimized with all the other things that we face in our daily lives. So I would say those are trends that we really do have to watch, because it may not necessarily be affecting any individual nonprofit, but collectively for the sector, these are things that we're seeing as a whole that have to be that really have to be watched carefully, so that it doesn't start to erode and affect each individual nonprofit.
Yeah, I'm a little bit torn because, when I hear 490 billion dollars donated to nonprofits, was it the figure, something like that?
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
was
Okay. So,
515 billion, and then it came in 2021, and then it was 499 in
so
2022.
if I was an executive director at a nonprofit, or I am on board, but I'd be like, there's $490 billion that are being donated out there, and we're getting 2 million of it. I'd
Hmm.
be like, I don't just because there's an upward trend, a downward trend. There
Yeah.
is a huge pie that I am not getting a hold of. That's the
Hmm.
way I would look at it. I'd say is it's got nothing to do. I think listen, understanding the macroeconomics
Hmm.
of it I think is important, right? But you know, if you're a $3 million nonprofit, you should expect. If I'm the executive director or I'm on the board, I'm like, we should be growing this at a 20, 30, 40% clip year over year.
Hmm.
And if we're not doing that, then we're not executing well. We're not getting the word out. We don't, we really need to get back to the basics. I'm not saying like, maybe you did 1 million one year and 2 million next year and 3 million. I mean, that's good. You're doing really well. It's great growth. Um, and, but if you're not doing that, then I think you need to look under the covers and say, why aren't we doing it? I don't really care that the industry did $490 billion. It just, to
Yeah.
me, I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think? Do you think that how does macroeconomic now listen, if you're part of the American Red Cross or something
Hmm.
like that, those figures do mean a lot,
Hmm.
right? But so what do you think?
Yeah, well, yes, I completely appreciate that those trends that we're seeing across the sector may have little to no relevance to the sort of average nonprofit who's a mid-size and bringing in $3 million a year operating budget, and it doesn't feel like that piece of that pie is really coming to them. But I would say also. Um, there is a continued worrying trend of not investing in the resources that nonprofits need to grow. So, too often, I see nonprofits who don't have fundraising staff, don't have enough fundraising staff. The fundraising staff that they might have three different core job responsibilities, which aren't only fundraising. And the reality is that without that human capacity to be able to build donor relationships, to really focus on all the tactics and strategies that go into ensuring a donor experience, continued fundraising outreach, that isn't going to be something that can grow and scale over time. So I see very, very often executive directors and nonprofit leaders who think, well, we don't have the budget to pay for someone who's not programmed, who's not directly doing the work that we are set out to do. And I would encourage, and I always do when I'm working with organizations, to really flip that script a bit and say, what is it that you need to be doing great work, to be having impact and results that you can measure and celebrate, that will help to solve the problems you were set up to do, and what is required to do that, and map it out, because most likely it's like probably a 2 or 3x what their current operating budget is, at the minimum. And so then they have to say, well, what do we need to start to raise more money? And it might be that they have to temporarily pause the program capacity so that they can invest in themselves, because that's the thing. It's this mindset of scarcity that really holds back the sector from investing in what is truly needed to be able to scale and grow. And the burnout rate, the state of mental health of fundraisers and nonprofit leaders, particularly as we are emerging out of COVID and the pandemic, and all of the other added stresses that we've experienced over the last few years, that's a growing reality, because the workforce is starting to shrink as well. And so fundraisers got fed up and they left because they were tired of the extraordinary demands on their time with limited resources, and facing these constant uphill battles without the support that they need. And that, I think, that has to be the reckoning that nonprofit leaders take seriously, and think, what is it that we need to do to really do our missions the best service, which is investing in our own capacity, which includes hiring the right fundraising staff so that they can start to grow and raise more money.
Yeah, I mean, this is my seventh year of the Nonprofit MBA podcast, and it often is said on many podcasts I've done in the past. The biggest problem is that people don't put enough money into indirect costs
Yes.
for staff, and so if you're listening today, you have to know that this is a huge deal that people are afraid, and partly it has to do with I know, like 20 years ago or longer, and that was longer than that, 30 years ago, it started with people finding out that I don't want to say who, but one of the huge
Hmm.
charities out there was only donating, 2% of their, this is,
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
their, uh, of the money coming in to the
Yeah.
actual cause, and
Yeah.
98% to
Yeah.
their staff. I don't hold me to that figure, but it was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
crazy number, right?
Yeah.
And so ever since that time, people are so scared,
Yeah.
and they've gone in the complete opposite direction. And you have to know, you listen, as someone who donates to nonprofits and myself, okay, and who's on the board of a nonprofit, I have no problem going to a major donor and saying, "Listen, we need this donation that you're making to go to indirect costs for salaries, because it makes an investment where we can raise more money, or we have these operational things going on, and we can't do it because we're giving all the money away." And as
Right.
as a donor myself, I'm a businessman. I'm like, I get it. I
Yeah.
get it. But people are afraid to have that conversation. So, I mean, this is old news. And if it's not old news to our listeners,
Mm.
it's old news. And you got to be going for that more. Um, so, what is the third thing, the trend that you're seeing?
So I think that the third thing I would say, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit at the beginning with the first, which is that there are so many other ways that donors want to get involved with or exercise their philanthropic principles and priorities. So, we're seeing it through increased Facebook fundraiser campaigns and involvement. We're seeing it through GoFundMe. Now, about 40% of accounts on GoFundMe are from nonprofits, but we have certainly seen over the last couple of years this increase in people giving to other people and other families and other individual causes that are set up for GoFundMe because they feel compelled to want to do something to help, and they feel like they can see that result. And so there are and we are also seeing an increase in donors giving to donor advised funds. Now, I think it was in 2020 or 2021 when many of the larger donor advised fund management firms like the Fidelities and Schwab's and Vanguards of the world, they all released their kind of minimum of what you need to set up a donor advised fund. So it became very accessible very quickly for so many people. And so there are many people who are thinking, I think it's something like 1.5 million donor advised funds now in the US. And the numbers are pretty staggering. I think it's something like, we saw something like 40 billion that was contributed into donor advised funds, and pretty significant amount that was granted out. So this is absolutely a giving vehicle of choice now for many organizations, for many donors, and they're seeing this as an opportunity to still put away money that they want to give and maybe not give in that moment because the choice is abundant, and they want to be thoughtful and intentional about where they're giving their dollars, whether it's $100 gift, a $10 gift, 1,000 or more. And so those, we have to recognize that donors have a lot more options now for how they can exercise their generosity. And the landscape of donors is actually becoming a little bit more sophisticated. So they are thinking about, how do I leverage what resources, financial resources I have, so that I can fulfill my philanthropic, priorities, and have the best impact for these gifts. And so, as fundraisers and nonprofit leaders, we have to be cognizant of what is driving those donors to be philanthropic and to be generous. What is it that's what are the ways that they're giving? How are they choosing? What's their giving channel of choice? Where does this nonprofit fit into what they want to achieve through their gifts and their giving strategies? And we have to really ensure that we're taking into account all the different ways that they might be giving. And there are a lot of critics out there about donor advised funds, but I would say it's really not our place to be telling people how they should be using their money. If they want to put it into a donor advised fund and hold it so that they can grant it out at a different time, that's their choice. It's the same with, saying people who have amassed, millions and billions should be giving out money. Yeah, maybe they should, but it's also their money. So it's on us to be really focusing on, as fundraisers and leaders, to focus on what we can control and be respectful and mindful of all the ways that donors are utilizing what financial resources they have for better, for good, and for the better, the betterment of our causes and communities.
So let's, in a short sentence, let's repeat those three trends that we talked about. What was number one?
Number one was that the giving, although it adjusted for inflation, was less than the previous year. So 2022 was less than 2021. The reality is that it's not surprising. It was sort of course correcting from two record-setting years prior to that, and in fact, we're still talking about $500 billion of contributed contributions to nonprofits. So in the grand scheme of things, giving, the sky is not falling. Giving is still remains strong. It was just course correcting from
Okay.
extraordinary years.
Number two.
Number two is that the number of donors and the number of volunteers has been steadily declining. We have been tracking this for the last 20 years and seen a 20% decline in both, certainly in the number of donors. So we really do need to be thinking about the donor experience and our donor retention rates as organizations, so that we can hold the donors who care about our causes, most importantly. And then the third is that there are many different ways that donors can be giving, and it will be to nonprofit organizations. It could be to their donor advised funds. It could be through other person-to-person channels. It could be in other ways. So we have to be mindful of the fact that donors, that people are, at their base, they want to do good. And the old model of people giving to charities and nonprofit registered charities as the only way to be philanthropic and generous is no longer the way of today.
Okay. I know I'm a neophyte in this. I listen to experts like yourself, and what I want to see is the trends that we saw over the last 10 years. And then after that, what I'd like to do is get a projection from you about what's going to go in the next several years. But some of the things that I've heard, that I heard or seen, and they're not in any order,
Mm-hmm.
was how software, again, this
Mm.
isn't the biggest deal, but how software has come down to the smallest nonprofits to be able to manage their donor base, their communication. It's the accounting that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. All of these services now have come down to the smaller nonprofits so that they can be run very, very efficiently, effectively. And if you haven't started using software, then that is a good area to really kind of move into. Fair enough. You agree with that in the last 10
Yeah,
years?
100%. And especially for the smaller to mid-sized nonprofits. I've seen such a great growth in CRMs for nonprofits. So
Yep.
there's really no excuse for nonprofits to be sticking with QuickBooks or Excel as their CRMs or as their kind of donor tracking systems, because there are many platforms now that are either free or have a scaled subscription fee, monthly fee that's based on revenue or record size or things like that. So there, and some of them are still quite good. In fact, I would say even better than the sort of the old, or the quote unquote old giants of the industry. So absolutely that. There are a lot of other communication tools and platforms now that nonprofits can certainly use and take advantage of. That all, and many of these now are integrating with the CRMs or sharing APIs, so that if you send something out on one platform, you can connect it to your CRM, and then it's tracked in there. Many of them are actually also built in to CRMs, communications tools, or finance. There's certainly integrations with finance tools as well. So there's a lot of different ways. If you start with a solid CRM, for example, then you can find out who they partner with and build out, so that you can minimize repetition of your staff to have to manually do multiple things, which creates more work, can create more mistakes, and it adds to the already overstretched bandwidth. There's also now, we've started to see this in the last couple of years. I'd say probably 2020, 2021. We've started seeing an acceleration of AI and other predictive modeling tools. I mean, we have always, with our clients, we've used, wealth screening, and we've been using analytics tools to dig into donor data, which then uses some formulas for predictive modeling of like which segments within a donor file might be more inclined to become monthly donors, as one example. But certainly, there's a lot of great applications for AI for nonprofits to be able to not do just those things, but also help them to be more efficient with their programming work, if that's a good application for that. Or they could become, in terms of fundraising, they might be able to do a little bit more prospecting using AI tools that are outside of their what they can do with their donor file. So it could help them with acquisition, for example. And again, many of those are open to and accessible to smaller to mid-sized nonprofits more than ever before. And there is, I sit on an advisory council for something called Fundraising.ai, which is really, this sort of came out of ChatGPT, which burst onto the market last year around this time. And there's suddenly these applications for how do we use ChatGPT and other, sort of AI services like that to be able to implement more effectively into our fundraising, communications or other tools. Some can actually start to do acknowledgments, or to do draft solicitations or draft talking points. Again, there's a purpose for it, but it doesn't mean that it's absolute. And so there's still a human element of it. And I don't believe it's going to replace anyone's job. I do think it's going to help, especially if you've got writer's block and you're like, I have to write this appeal and I don't know where to start. You give it a prompt. Some of them can integrate with your own website so that you can pull information out. Some of them can actually be, you can feed it information not accessible, to the general public, and you can come up with appeals or other talking points as a starting point. And then, of course, there's going to be the actual intelligence of a human being who can then refine it and make it more tailored and customized, and less obvious as something that was generated by an AI tool like that. But there's still kind of a worry of what this all means, because ChatGPT really caused some curiosity and worry, fear, and a little bit of hesitation. I mean, let's face it, the sector is not quick to adopt lots of new things. So it's getting interest, and there are efforts to ensure that there's a safe use for AI tools within the sector. safe and I would say ethical, although safe is really the kind of the easier word to understand, so that people understand, there are guardrails and there are kind of guidelines for how does an organization use other all of these AI tools in a way that's responsible and does no harm. So that's, I think, one of the areas that will continue to gain traction over the next year or two and beyond, for sure. We're starting to see some screening services and other vendors who are incorporating AI capability within their prospecting and their research capabilities. So that's something to watch as well. And again, I think there are different price points for them now, but smaller to mid-sized nonprofits really shouldn't dismiss it because they feel like it might be out of the realm of possibility, or it's too expensive or whatever. Really, as they think about, if they've already invested in a good CRM, CRMs are probably going to go that direction at some point as well. I haven't seen it yet, but I would not be surprised. But look at all the tech capabilities that can help the administrative staff, the executive staff, and the program staff do their jobs better. And I think that the early adopters, the ones who are more willing to take some risks and try some things out, will be able to then free up a little bit of time and will be able to do their work a little bit more efficiently and effectively over time.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this next thing I'm about to say, the trends that I've seen over the last 10 years, um, the past 10 years, it does relate to AI because I have some personal experience in this, and that is for as many tools as there's out there, the donors are feeling that they're not being thanked.
Oh, yep.
And I have personal experience with that. I raised quite a bit of amount of money for an organization, and I was hardly thanked at all. And
Yeah.
I won't, I just,
Yeah.
I'm not doing it again. And it really didn't take much. And so, relying on technology, um, because keep in mind that if you're relying on that technology, keep in mind that everybody else has that technology too.
Mhm.
And so, you're maybe you're sending out, emails and you're sending out newsletters because it's easier to do it now, right?
Mhm.
Well, so is
Mhm.
everybody else.
Yeah.
All right. So
Mhm.
the difference is, I mean, what should this organization have done? And they weren't small. They were about an $8 million nonprofit. They should have known how much money I raised
Mhm.
and made a number of gestures toward me to thank me for the amount of money I raised for the organization and gave, by the way.
Mm.
So I'm not
Yep.
even counting that. Okay, so
Yeah.
we're talking about $25,000. It
Yep.
wasn't small,
Yep.
and it was the first year. You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
so so don't forget the human touch, which is, oh my God, it's your ace in the hole. It's your ace in the hole to be
Yeah.
able to just call somebody, write a handwritten note, go
Mhm.
see them, take them out to lunch. Geez, it makes the business fun, you
Right?
know? And and to pick up the phone, and to make that part of your monthly, weekly practice, pick up the phone once a week, call one of your best donors and just see how they're doing. Thank them. Don't
Yep.
ask them for any more money. Just check in with them. This is not rocket science.
No, and I hate hearing the example you just shared because that was such a bridge that was burned, right? You worked hard, you were generous of your time and your network and your own financial capabilities, and it wasn't recognized and celebrated in the way that it should have. And so that it makes my fundraiser heart kind of crack a little
But
bit
I
because
but I listen, I hear it all the time. I read about it all the time. Now I see it personally happen to me,
yes.
and actually it happened with two organizations I was involved with. So, even as a board member,
Yep.
thanking the board member, and because and usually your your board member is usually your biggest donors,
Yes. Yeah.
and then plus they're donating their time too. So um, yeah, so that was another trend, and we already talked about over the last 10 years. The idea about indirect costs as well. So
Yeah.
we have a couple of minutes left, so you already talked about AI going forward,
Yeah.
right? What do you think the big trends are going to be? Give me two big trends that you're going to see in the next 5 years. We already talked about AI. What are the two of the big trends that you think are predicting that's going to happen in the next 5 years?
Well, you've just kind of teed up what one of them that I think it's usually the soapbox that I stand on for every presentation, podcast, anything that I'm part of. It's around donor retention, because while I started our conversation with saying, there are these other factors, external factors that nonprofits don't have control of, that are influencing how a person will give or in what ways they will give. The part that we are in control of as nonprofit leaders is that donor experience, and paying attention to who are we keeping, how are we stewarding and celebrating our donors and engaging with them so that they want to stick around. That has been a declining trend over the last few years, and I think it's probably over. I'd say somewhere over the last 10 years, it has declined from certainly 50%. I think probably 15 years ago, it might have been 15%, a little bit maybe past 15 years ago. It over the last few years has declined down to about 43%. So that means on average, nonprofits are losing 60% of their donors each and every year. And for first time donors, they're losing on average 80% of their donors. So again, that's not, if you think about a first time gift that you might make, you're probably not surprised to hear that, because of that organizations are not, especially if it's a small gift, they're not prioritizing that stewardship of every single gift that comes in. And we are still in this old mindset of we've got to prioritize based on gift amount. And the reality is that, especially for first time donors, they're not giving their very best gift the first time. They're testing it out. They're seeing what's the experience like. Is this an organization that I do want to invest in over time and increased amounts? And nonprofits are, partly the mindset is not there to be thinking about retention as a metric that we have to measure and hold to. We are often focused on just dollar amounts, that budget amounts. What's our fundraising goal that we have to hit? And that means, and then the mindset is we've got to keep asking as many times as we can to try to hit that, to close as many gifts to hit that goal. When if we stop and think about how many donors did we have last year? How many donors did we have the year before? What are our donor retention trends? Are we keeping our donors? If we're not, that's step one, to try to reverse that attrition and try to start to raise more money, because the people who are the most likely to increase giving are the people who have already given to you. We had a client once a number of years ago who said, we need to get more donors. And I said, hey, okay, hang on here. How many names do you have in your file? And they said, we have 20,000 names. And I said, well, how many are actually donors? And it was like under 1,000. I said, okay, so you don't actually need to get more donors. You need to do something with the 19,000 names that are in your file that haven't been inspired to give. So I think I'm not optimistic that that number, that donor retention trend, is going to increase over the next couple of years. In fact, it might hold steady, or it might start to continue to decline. My hope is that nonprofits will get that wake up call that they have to put this as a priority, because it kind of tracks with the declining number of donors that we're seeing. And so that's the key to sustainability and to financial growth for organizations, is to prioritize donor retention, both of first-time donors and of existing donors, so that those will continue to stick around and they'll continue to give. There are the tools like automating welcome series. So those gifts come through from a first-time donor, they get put into a welcome series of a couple of different touch points. It doesn't take the human interaction off the hook, but it at least gets something out the door, so that overstretched fundraiser doesn't feel like they week or 2 or 3 go by and they haven't thanked that first time donor. I just became a first time donor to an organization, and within a few days, I got a call on my cell phone. I wasn't able to pick it up, and they actually left me a text because they couldn't get through to voicemail. And so they said, "Hey, just want to say thank you. I saw that you made a first time gift. We are so delighted and grateful, and can't wait to tell you more updates as we are, putting your donor dollars to good work." And then they sent me an email, and it's like right there, it made me feel that I was seen and that I
They're
was
organized too. Yeah, it made you
correct.
feel
And
like
I
they're
think
organized
that
too.
has to,
Maybe because
yeah,
we're in the industry, but in general, yeah.
but it has to be. There's that balance of how do we use the tech tools like email automation, and other tools like what we've been talking about, with good CRMs and good donor data and AI capabilities, but there's also that human element. And so
Yep.
the mindset has to be amongst executive leaders and not fundraisers, that they carve out time for that human interaction, because we do, right? How often do we say, I'm going to send them a quick email, or I'm going to send them a quick text, when it's far more powerful to pick up the phone, and even if you leave a voicemail, you're using a different sense. You're hearing a voice saying, "Thank you so much. We are so grateful." And you can hear it differently than you can seeing an email.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
there's already studies that show that we have a negative bias when we receive emails anyway. So it's an old fashioned way of kind of communicating, but will be much more effective in the long run.
All good stuff. I think we could talk for a lot more. Unfortunately, it's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank so much Barbara O'Reilly from Windmill Hill Consulting for coming on today's podcast. And if you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app as well. The Nonprofit MBA podcast is in the top 1% of podcasts that are listened to in the nonprofit space, and we're very proud of that. And part of that has to also do with giving us a 5-star review as well, so more people can hear about us. So if you can do that, we really appreciate that. And also, of course, if you're looking for a line of credit for your nonprofit, please visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. And Barbara, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, the best way is by visiting our website, whillconsulting.com. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn. And so people can find me on LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks for coming on today.
Oh, always a pleasure, Stephen. Thanks again.
So I want to thank everybody who's listening today. Not so much for listening today, which would be the normal thing to do, but for trying to make the world a better place. I don't think there's a day that doesn't go by when we don't have major issues going on. But you guys are out there on the front line, every single day, every single minute, every single hour, trying to make the world a better place. And I thank you for that. I know Barbara does as well.
Mhm.
And I just want to remind you that you're no good to your employees, you're no good to your cause, you're no good to your family and friends if you don't take care of yourself first. And we have a lot of people who are listening today who are very, very, very great at giving of themselves. But I just want to remind you that saving the world is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So make sure you're doing the things for yourself first, and then you can take care of everybody else. Other than that, have a fantastic day. At the end, this today is being recorded on December 13th of 2023. And I want to wish everybody upcoming very happy holidays and a happy and prosperous new year. Thank you for everything you do. And of course, thank you for listening to the Nonprofit MBA podcast.